Good afternoon. It's Friday. Come on, guys. Don't let Brian Karam show you up. I know that there is more spirit out there. As many of you saw last night, the Senate adopted a budget resolution. This is another important milestone for tax reform and sets the stage for us to pass major tax cuts that will deliver more jobs and higher wages for hardworking Americans all over the country. Many of you have seen today that the First Lady donated the gown she wore to the inaugural balls to the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. In her speech, she mentioned that leading up to Inauguration Day, everyone was so busy getting ready that the dress's designer ended up only having 2 weeks to work on the First Lady's design and create the dress. It obviously came together, and the First Lady is very excited to take part in the rich tradition of First Ladies contributing to and maintaining our great history. By the way, if you've not visited the Smithsonian's exhibit of First Lady dresses, you certainly should take time to do that. Lastly, today is a particularly special day for all of us here at the White House. There are a lot of people here who serve the President and our country behind the scenes. One of those people is Hope Hicks, our incredible communications director. Tomorrow is her birthday, and as you know, I love a good birthday. So I wanted to make sure to mention it here in the last briefing of the week. So happy birthday, Hope. If you get a minute, be sure to send her a note and wish her a happy birthday. Thanks for your selfless leadership and perhaps most importantly, your great sense of humor. And with that, happy Friday, and I'll take your questions. Jeff.
Sir, I'd like to open with a question about the Fed. The President finished his interviews this week and said in an interview with Fox Business that he would consider having Powell and Taylor come to the Fed together. Should we take that as a signal that the other candidates are not going to get the job?
We still don't have an announcement on that. As the President said, that's something that's certainly under consideration, but he hasn't ruled out a number of options, and he'll have an announcement on that soon in the coming days.
What else is he looking for as he makes his decision?
As you know, I'm not going to get ahead of a big announcement like that the President himself will make, but we'll keep you posted when we're ready to roll that out.
Sure.
Blake.
On that note, Janet Yellen, the President was extremely critical of her during the campaign, saying at one point she was too political, that she should be ashamed of herself, essentially said she was a political arm of the President and Hillary Clinton. Now he said some rather nice things about her, most recently a couple times that he respects her. What has changed in his thinking as it relates to Janet Yellen over the last year, and can you shed some light on their relationship?
I think them having the opportunity to spend some time directly communicating with one another, certainly through this process. But beyond that, again, I'm not going to weigh any further into this process and where we are, other than the fact that the President will make an announcement on it soon.
Now, when is the President himself going to weigh in on what happened to those 4 special ops soldiers in Niger?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I follow your question there.
Will the President address publicly, and if so, when? What exactly happened to these 4 special ops soldiers?
Yeah, as we said, as General Kelly specifically addressed several times yesterday, that the Department of Defense has initiated a review which occurs anytime there's an American that's killed in action. We're going through that process. The President, the Department of Defense, and frankly the entire country and government want to know exactly what happened. And the President and the nation are grateful for those 4 American heroes, and we won't rest until we get some answers, and that's part of this process, and that's what they'll do. And when the time is appropriate, we'll talk about the details of the investigation.
Sarah, the South Florida Sun Sentinel released a video of Congresswoman Wilson's speech in 2015. In the speech, it doesn't appear that she referenced funding for the FBI building in South Florida. Does General Kelly still stand by the statement that he made yesterday, that he felt that she was grandstanding and that she was taking credit for
Absolutely.
funding?
General Kelly said he was stunned that Representative Wilson made comments at a building dedication honoring slain FBI agents about her own actions in Congress, including lobbying former President Obama on legislation. As General Kelly pointed out, if you're able to make a sacred act like honoring American heroes all about yourself, you're an empty barrel. If you don't understand that reference, I'll put it a little more simply. As we say in the South, all hat, no cattle.
Well, in fact, have you seen the speech?
I have.
And then you know that most of it was her effusively praising these FBI agents. And when she was talking about what she did in Congress, she was not talking about securing the $20 million. She was talking about naming the building for these FBI agents, who she then went on to effusively praise. And that was the bulk of the speech.
She also mentioned that, and she also had quite a few comments that day that weren't part of that speech and weren't part of that video that were also witnessed by many people that were there. What General Kelly referenced yesterday.
Tell us specifically, because
exactly what he said. There was a lot of grandstanding. He was stunned that she had taken that opportunity to make it about herself.
Can he come out here and talk to us about this at some point?
I think he's addressed that pretty thoroughly yesterday.
No, he was wrong yesterday in talking about getting the money. The money was
if you want to go after General Kelly, that's up to you. But I think that if you want to get into a debate with a 4-star Marine general, I think that's something highly inappropriate. Go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. When President Trump spoke at the CIA building in January in front of the stars of 117 CIA agents who had fallen and been killed in the line of duty, he talked about a number of different things, including a lot about himself. He talked about the fake news attacking him. He talked about the MLK bus and the controversy over that. He talked about the crowd size at the
that wasn't an event set to memorialize those individuals. That was a celebration talking about the transfer of power. It's two very different events. If you look at the president's comments at events like the 9/11 ceremony earlier this year, those were very somber. Those were focused specifically on those events. Those are not even apples to apples, so that's not a fair comparison. Jordan?
Thank you, Sarah. Putting the Congresswoman aside for a second, I want to focus on what the mother of Sergeant Johnson said. She said that she felt that the president disrespected her in his comments. Now, regardless of the president's intentions, is the president concerned that what he said might have come across as disrespectful, and does he plan to follow up with her and repair that relationship?
Certainly, if the spirit of which those comments were intended were misunderstood, that's very unfortunate. But as the president has said, as General Kelly said, who I think has a very deep understanding of what that individual would be going through, his comments were very sympathetic, very respectful, and that was the spirit in which the president intended them. If they were taken any other way, that's certainly an unfortunate thing. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The 43rd president of the United States, President George W. Bush, made some comments in New York City yesterday, and I'd like you, if you could, just to address some comments that he made just concerning the issue of Russia, specifically Russian influence in the United States. He said the Russian government has made a project of turning Americans against each other, and he also said that Russian interference will not be successful. Foreign aggressions, including cyber attacks, disinformation, and financial influence, should never be downplayed or tolerated. Do you agree with those sentiments expressed by the former president?
Do we agree that Russian interference shouldn't be tolerated? Absolutely. And we've said that many times before, and certainly would argue that that has been repeated. I know I've said it at least a dozen times from this podium.
And I just want to follow up with a question I've asked you a few times, most recently in July. It relates to our relationship with Russia, and I've never gotten an answer for you on that. Does the President Trump, view Russia as an ally, a partner, or an adversary?
And as I've said before, I think a lot of that depends on Russia and what type of relationship they want to have and whether or not they want to be a good actor or a bad actor. And we're going to continue trying to work with them on certain things that are very important, particularly for national security, on things like Syria, on things like North Korea. We'd like to be able to work with them to confront some of those threats. And so some of that will be determined by the actions that Russia takes and how they want to be perceived. Matthew.
Thanks. I also have a question about that George W. Bush speech, but first, just to clarify, are you saying the White House is no longer saying that the Congresswoman talked about the funding? She just talked about legislation in general?
We're talking, I specifically said, and I'll repeat it again, that General Kelly said he was stunned that she made the comments about herself, and that was the point of what he said. That was what took place here yesterday, and we still stand by those comments.
Okay, and then on the George W. Bush speech, he said at one point, bigotry seems emboldened, our politics seem more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication. Does President Trump agree with this assessment? And if so, what does he see as his role in addressing that?
Does he agree with the assessment of what? I'm sorry.
That bigotry seems emboldened and our politics seem more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication. Those were former President Bush's words.
I think if anybody is pushing a lot of fabricated things right now, I think most of that would be coming from the news media, and we would certainly agree with that sentiment. David?
The President signed an executive
What about
order
the
today.
bigotry?
I'm sorry, I've called on David.
The President signed an executive order today. Basically, what it appears to do is it allows the Pentagon to recall retired officers into duty under the 9/11 authority that he has. What's the reason for this executive order?
I don't have anything further on that, and I'll have to get back to you, David. Sarah?
General Kelly was obviously very upset that this has now become a political conversation, the President's call with the widow, and I think more broadly the fallout of the soldiers that were killed in Niger. So why did he feel like it was appropriate to come out here to call a Congresswoman an empty barrel rather than calling her privately like he's done with other members of Congress who've been critical of the President? And why did President Trump feel the need to take that even further today and tweet about her?
I think that it's real simple. You guys are the ones talking a lot about that story, and he felt it was important to address you and all of America directly. This story has been given an enormous amount of coverage over the last 48 hours, and he thought it was important that people got a full and accurate picture of what took place, and that was a personal decision that he made, that he wanted to come out and frankly not just share with you, but like he said, share with all of America and make an appeal to America to go back to kind of honoring that sacred code of Gold Star families.
Question that the President was asked earlier today, I know there was an investigation.
And in terms of, hold on, just to finish on the rest of your question, why the President felt the need to respond, it's because it should have ended yesterday after General Kelly's comments. But it didn't. It continued. And it's still continuing today. It's still the bulk of the coverage on most every TV you turn on and most every newspaper that you open up today. And the President responded to those continued accusations and continued mischaracterizations of his comments.
One other question, the President was asked earlier today whether he authorized this mission in Niger. Can you give us any information about whether this was something he authorized or even something he was aware of before finding out that American soldiers were killed in it?
As I said, there's as the process, anytime an American is killed in action, there is a full review that takes place, and before we start jumping to any conclusions, we want to make sure that that is completed fully, and then we'll have those details for you at that time.
Sarah, thanks. On Niger, a senior congressional aide who was briefed on the matter said that there is an indication that there was a massive intelligence failure. Is that the assessment of the White House?
Once again, as I just told Sarah, we're going to wait until that review is complete by the Department of Defense, and we'll answer those questions at that time.
One more question, Sarah.
Sorry,
Laura Trump said she saw a transcript of the phone call. Can you just answer that question,
Did the
Sarah?
President authorize explicitly the operation in Niger, or was that delegated down in the...
Again, I'm not going to get into any of the details at this point. You may be able to talk with those at the Department of Defense, and they can answer anything further. But where we are in the process until the review is complete, we're not going to weigh in any further. Kelly?
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee is going to take...
Sorry, I'm going to try to get to everybody. Kelly, go ahead.
Given all of the reaction to the content of the President's phone call, does President Trump intend to make phone calls to families of the fallen in the future should other Americans die while he is Commander-in-Chief?
I think we're hoping and praying that those phone calls don't have to take place, and so that's where we are right now.
The Los Angeles Times has reported that the military operating in Niger had requested additional overwatch capacity and medical response assistance in the months leading up to this ambush on October 4th. Is the President satisfied that that Special Forces unit, when it went out there that day, had all the resources that it needed to operate there?
As I've said several times here today, and will continue until that review is complete, I'm not going to get into the details until that is finalized. I think too often in cases like that, we have jumped to conclusions and tried to make determinations before all of the details are known. We want to make sure that that process is complete before we weigh in. John Gizzi.
Thank you, Sarah. Have to keep it to one question today?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Even you, John. I know it'll be tough.
I obey.
Wow, if only I had that kind of power over anybody else, including my kids, that would be great.
reluctantly. Several London publications have said that the president's visit to London, when and if the details work out, will be a working visit with Prime Minister May and not an official state visit, which means he will not be received by the Queen at Buckingham Palace. What will be the nature of his visit to London and to Prime Minister May? A working visit or a state visit?
That still hasn't been determined. We're still going back and forth with our allies there, and once we have those travel details outlined and determined, we'll certainly let you know. But they've made the invitation for the president to come. We've accepted, and we're working out the logistics. We anticipate that it'll be sometime next year, but at this point, there's no other details beyond
Downing
that.
Street has made the invitation.
Right.
Thanks, Aaron. State Department announced today that it's now up to 24 people who have been impacted by the sonic attacks in Havana. I wanted to ask, is the president satisfied with the investigation into what's happening, and has he reached out or considered reaching out to any of the victims?
I don't believe that he has reached out to any of the victims involved at this point. That's an ongoing investigation and something we can't weigh in on further at this time.
On the call to Sergeant Johnson, Laura Trump seemed to suggest in an interview this morning that there was a transcript of the call and that she'd read it. Is there a transcript, and has it been shared with members of the president's family?
There's not a transcript of the call. I believe she was responding to reports and things that she had read, but I haven't spoken directly with her. I'd refer you to the campaign that handles her press inquiries, but there's not a transcript. Fred?
Oh, thanks, sir. Senator John Cornyn confirmed today that he is blocking the nomination to win for Russ Boyd to try to get more relief funds for Texas after Hurricane Harvey. Does that come as a surprise or a disappointment to the White House that the number 2 Republican would be blocking a nominee?
The administration welcomes a conversation with all members of Congress about the next disaster relief request, which we expect to come in the coming weeks. While we work with Congress on that next request, we urge the Senate to keep doing their jobs by confirming qualified nominees to crucial positions inside our government. This administration has already faced unprecedented obstruction of its nominees, and further delays only hurt the American people. And we hope that they'll get on board and make that process move further along.
Sarah, given President Bush's comments yesterday that were asked about, in general, does the White House feel it's appropriate for past presidents to be critical of the sitting president? And when was the last time President Trump spoke to President Bush?
I'm not sure the last time they spoke, but our understanding is that those comments were not directed towards the president. And in fact, when these two individuals, both past presidents, have criticized the president, they've done so by name and very rarely do it without being pretty direct, as both of them tend to be. So we'll take them at their word that these actions and comments weren't directed towards the president.
The United Nations, of course, is following very carefully the refugee situation along the Bangladesh-Myanmar border. And President Trump today met with the UN Secretary General. Did they speak about the Rohingya refugee situation? Was the president asked for any further help? What was the tenor of their conversation?
They had a very productive conversation. We'll have a readout coming with more details about that later this afternoon. And we'll be around the rest of today to answer questions. And with that, happy Friday. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Thanks.
One more, please. Friday was Thank you.
In the words of our producer who just spoke to me, happy Friday, everybody. Welcome to the briefing room here on ABC. We're coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News. What a crazy, wild week we've had here in Washington. I'm here joined by Arlette Saenz and Justin Fischel. We'll have a team at the White House joining us shortly. That was a pretty long briefing compared to what we had yesterday with General Kelly by Sarah Sanders. The topic is very clear. A lot of questions about these 4 servicemen killed in Niger earlier a couple weeks ago. But since the president dived into this controversy at a press conference that he gave on Monday over at the Rose Garden, it clearly dominated the conversation, especially after yesterday when General John Kelly came out, dove right into this topic, had on a very personal topic to him since, he lost his son overseas in war. I want to go to you first, though, on this, Justin, because, you covered the Pentagon and State Department for us for quite some time and before you came to us. The review is now a big question. We saw Sarah asked about that repeatedly. She said DOD is on this. How does this process work?
Well, and what's so interesting is, I can get to that, how this has transformed from a discussion about the families to why was he calling these families in the first place? And now we're talking about what happened in Niger. How did these 4 Americans die? And there are questions about it. It was bad. They were ambushed. There are questions about should they have been doing this mission that they have done 30 times before. But they had experience doing these things. The DOD is going to be looking into it. In fact, Jim Mattis, the Defense Secretary, is headed over to Capitol Hill right now to talk to John McCain. John McCain wants answers. Everybody wants answers. We'll see what happens, but remember, this is a Green Beret unit, 12 American men, positioned with Nigerian forces on the border with Mali, where Al Qaeda and ISIS have these seriously dangerous groups. This is a dangerous mission. And could there have been better intelligence? I'm sure there could have been.
But still, a lot of questions that remain, and obviously, Arla, General Kelly yesterday kind of took us all back. It was the 3 of us here yesterday. We had not expected to see him. Rare for him to come out into the briefing room, but he did give a moment of pause to really what the issue is here, and now the fact that we're talking about what actually happened here.
Right, and that was probably one of the most raw moments that we've seen out of this White House, and he was trying to bring it back to this human element of what everyone goes through when someone dies in combat, and what it's like to bring them back, what it's like to bring their families back.
Right.
But it also continues to highlight what happened here in Niger, and there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. We know lawmakers have questions. We know that the Pentagon and the FBI, they're looking into reviewing what happened over there, and I think a lot of people are also anxious to maybe hear from the president about that. We heard our colleague Mary Bruce ask Sarah Sanders, when are they going to address this? And Mary, you're over at the White House. What did you think about Sarah's response to that today?
Well, you heard her answer there. She says they'll respond when the time is appropriate. That's a pretty open-ended response. We know that this is currently being investigated. She also took what seemed like a bit of a veiled swipe, perhaps, at some previous investigations, perhaps in a nod to the Benghazi investigation, suggesting that they don't want to rush to conclusions here and perhaps put out information that then later turns out not to be correct. But look, there are a lot of questions here that need to be answered, and so far there's been a lot of mudslinging back and forth in the aftermath of this attack and this huge debate, of course, between the president and the families of the fallen soldiers, but not a lot of details yet about what really happened. And the president was asked a question about that this morning. He brushed it off. We've also seen Secretary Mattis has yet to really address it this morning. He had a similar opportunity, and he did not go into it there either. So we just sort of have to stay on this and wait and see. But when the White House says they'll respond when the time is appropriate, unfortunately, that doesn't really give us much of a timeline to work off of.
No timeline whatsoever. But you're right, Mary. We are going to keep our eyes on this. We'll have more on it tonight on World News and always at abcnews.com. Mary, since you are with us, and of course those who don't know, Mary Bruce, our senior congressional correspondent, who every time I talk to Mary Bruce on this show, she somehow is at the White House. She gets lost on her way to work.
Bounce back and forth. I get lost very easily.
Yeah, it's a short afternoon. But Mary, there was a little bit of good news for the White House last night. Their budget passed, right? Walk us through this, Mary. What's that next step there? Tight vote, 51-49 last night.
Yeah, so the Senate Republicans, they've now cleared this first major hurdle. Late last night, they passed a budget resolution that clears the way, opens the doors for them to now act on tax reform by just a simple majority vote. Now, they're not quite there just yet because the budget resolution now has to go to the House, but it is expected there to pass quickly, and then that allows Republicans to get onto their top priority, which is, of course, tax reform. But it's interesting, given the fact that this is a pretty big, it's a big step, and you would think that this White House would want to be she's sort of shouting that from the rooftops, so much of this briefing was consumed, so much of the oxygen in that briefing room was consumed by questions on other topics, because as we know, this White House has, shall we say, had some difficulties with staying sort of focused on their policy agenda, getting dragged into other fights and into other areas.
Shiny object effect, always on duty over there. Speaking of taxes, let's move on to that, and we're going to bring it back in here to the Bureau with Arlette and Justin. You know, that is the next thing they need to get done here, right? They have a budget. Healthcare, Mary could tell us, and we'll get back to her, but God knows what's happening there. Taxes is the thing that the president wants to get over the line. He has said he's an expert on this. No one knows the tax code better than Donald Trump. He needs to get this over the line, Arlette.
And really, they're going all in, trying to get something done with tax reform. They haven't really had a major legislative accomplishment this entire year, and they're putting all of their eggs basically in the tax basket at this point. But right now, we still don't have a concrete bill. We don't know if there's going to be a division within the Republican Party. We know that they're trying to court Democrats like Heidi Heitkamp and Joe Manchin. So there's a lot of questions about whether or not they're actually going to be able to get something done. But they're very eager to get the ball rolling.
And Justin, this has to be a hit they get. That really is what this boils down to.
Yeah, it does. I really don't know if they're going to do it. I mean, you heard Corker say the other day, he thought health care was difficult. Taxes is a whole different ballgame. And as Arlette mentioned, I mean, where is the bill? This is, again, one of those things they're doing behind closed doors. Nobody can see it happening in real time. They're not talking about it in real time, which freaks the Democrats out and sets them up for opposition no matter what they see.
And I mean, Mary, I just got to bounce this over to you. You know, in your normal days when you're running around the Hill, what are you hearing on this? You know, as far as this fight's concerned, this is obviously a top priority for the White House. Do they have the votes yet to get that through?
You have to know what you're voting on before you can tell if you have the votes, and that's really the problem here. Is, as always, the devil is in the details. This is their top priority. This is do or die politically for Republicans. They have to show that they can get a big ticket item through, and right now that is tax reform. Look, otherwise they're going to hit that 1 year mark without, you know, with many accomplishments, but without that big legislative achievement. So they know the pressure is on, and you heard earlier in the week when Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was up here meeting with the president, they came out for that pretty wild press conference, but at the top of that, the president made very clear, he said, Mitch McConnell and I are on the same page when it comes to tax reform. The question now is whether the rest of the Republican caucus can get on that same page as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a long battle going into the end of the year. But again, that is going to focus right now of this White House and the tax team over there, both at 1600 and at the Treasury Department. We'll see what happens there. Mary, I know you need to go, or else you could stay for this one little fun thing. There was something else that happened around D.C. today. Melania Trump donated her gown from the inauguration gala to the Smithsonian. It's a tradition for all the First Ladies. I think we have a picture of it. We can give you a look there. It will go on display in a glass case at Smithsonian. Tradition for all the First Ladies. Michelle Obama did it. Hillary Clinton. It goes back and back. Laura Bush. I happen to know a thing or two about this dress because I'm covering the campaign. My little, you know, fashion moments here. My Tim Gunn sense.
Are you giving a fashion report?
So I am. Get ready for it. So this is a dress designed by Hervé Pierre. He worked for Carolina Herrera, and this was the first thing he designed on his own. Yes, Carolina. Yeah. Carolina. Yeah, I know you all know this.
I do not.
You do not. No, you don't know her. But you know, this was a big moment for Mrs. Trump. It was, you know, what is she going to wear? Who is she going to wear?
Yeah.
And it was a first-timer, and she took a shot on it, and a lot of people, you know, my wife, that's how I know all the details on it now, were very impressed by it.
And earlier we were actually talking about what is the exact definition of couture, and all of us kind of were at a loss for words and couldn't come up with a way to describe it, had to look it up, and this is a couture gown that was designed for her. It's personally one of my favorite, probably, First Lady gowns. I don't know.
Is it one of your favorites, Justin?
I'm also at a loss for words. I really have nothing to add here.
Mary, Justin needs your help. Save him, Mary.
I will say it is a very cool rite of passage, and as someone who grew up here in D.C., when you're a little girl and you get to go to the museum and walk around and see all these big fancy ball gowns, it is pretty cool. It is pretty neat. Almost as cool as hearing John Santucci do a full fashion report.
Hey, listen, I'm a jack of all trades. We're going to do wine reviews later if you want to stay with us.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. That's after hours, though. Thank you so much for joining us on the Briefing Room. For Mary Bruce, Justin Fischel, and Arlette Saenz, I'm John Santucci. Check out the latest from us all day at abcnews.com. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you next week on the Briefing Room.